Welcome to the MuseCast, where we squeeze every last drop of inspiration out of Sunday's sermon.
Well, hello. Welcome to the MuseCast. We are so glad that you have joined us again this week. I'm Shawna Boren. That's Osheta Moore. That's Dan Kent. And if they're reversed, because I don't know what you're seeing on your screen, I think you can figure out who's who, hopefully. Thank you all for the way that you guys tune in and interact with us. Thank you for, I heard that people were touched and blessed by our more reflective, prayerful MuseCast last week. So thanks for that. And I'm so excited, Dan and Osheta, because this past weekend, we started a new series, which is actually a mini series, which falls under the big overarching Sermon on the Mount series. But I'm excited because the passages that we're focusing on are the salt and light passages, and those have just always been some of my favorites. So I'm excited for us to talk about it. Dan, I cannot wait to hear your summary. It'll be as if everyone is listening to the sermon for the very first time,
right.
I'm sure.
That's right. Yeah.
Your summary.
Well, it is. It's such a great passage. And it's got so much richness and so many different ways that you can apply it to different things. And I've like even Greg's take this weekend, I hadn't really heard that take, and he really focused on salt. And and the passage talks about salt and light, but he really focused on this first verse, which is Matthew 5, verse 13. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. And so he did what a lot of people do when they look at what does it mean to be salt. And he looked at the first century uses for salt, and really the primary use that he focused on initially was to use salt as a preservative, and it preserves something. And he looked at how historically a lot of Christians have said, well, what you need to preserve. That's the question. What do we preserve with this salt? He said a lot of churches have said, well, you need to preserve what's right. You have to, preserve rightness. And so then you end up kind of being judgmental. And Greg said that he thinks that you should look at it a different way. Instead of saying you're preserving rightness, what you should look at it is you're preserving the worth of each individual. Yes. You're preserving that profound, infinite worth that Christ loves us with this unsurpassable love, as demonstrated on his unsurpassable sacrifice on the cross. And that worth is there, and we lose touch with that worth because the world can just grind us down, and the world can make us feel so small and so unimportant and so worthless. And so that's why when Jesus is being salt in his life, and this is the example that Greg uses, he looks at this prostitute who the whole community kind of despised and were sort of embarrassed by having these prostitutes because it was such a deplorable thing. But Jesus treated this woman as if she were a queen, and she praised this woman, and he lifts this woman up as this great example of what it looks like when we are forgiven of our sins. And so that's just sort of preserving that woman's worth. She does not deserve the indignities that she experiences because of the life that she has been forced into. And so to be a preservative is to go and find that worth and to reveal the worth that person has, even though in society's eyes, it might not look like they're worth much. And then the second part that he looked at is similar. And he talked about how the second kind of use for salt is to make things taste better. And Shawna, I know that you're familiar with this one.
I love me some salt.
And the point that he makes is so good. He says, it's the salt doesn't really have flavor in and of itself. The salt really brings out the flavor in what's already there. And so again, a lot of times Christians are trying to be the flavor, and it usually doesn't work very well. It's better to just bring out the flavor of what's already there, and that's what good salt should do. And I think what I liked about this sermon is it really kind of gives us a really useful, practical kind of idea of where do we need to be salt? where do we need our saltiness to kind of blossom?
Mm-hmm.
And it's wherever people are being oppressed, wherever they're being humiliated, or there's indignities or mistreatment. Those are the places where we need to go and preserve the worth of those people who are being treated that way. And so I think it was a deep sermon, and it was a very practical sermon, and a great way to kick off this part of the Sermon on the Mount series.
Absolutely. First of all, we got to hear from Bruce Willis. Kidding. It was Greg. So he, that man, oh my Lord. I was watching the comments as they were coming through, and someone thought that we had like someone else there that day, and because Greg was hiding behind his sermon papers, his notes, and they thought that we had just somehow were piping in Greg's voice. And then when he pulled his papers down, you saw that it was him and his shaved head and everything, and it was great. Anyway, so that was fun. But yes, I feel like, again, I've said from the beginning, these are some of my most favorite passages. I've always loved them and appreciated them, and I've always felt like they were just like this encouragement of like, this is what you've been chosen to be and do as God's people. However, I will say that I have never heard it preached or taught this way, this practically, this down like to the bare bones of this is what this means for you in your life as a kingdom person. And I loved it. I loved that we spent so much time talking about in the sermon the idea that Jesus came to preserve others' worth. Like you said, Dan, it was so beautiful. And at one point, Greg even said, look around. You're like, where are the prostitutes? Where are the tax collectors in your life? Like you need to have people in your life that you are you feel called to ascribe worth to. Go out and look for places in which people's worth has been pushed down and cast aside by society and the world, and maybe laws and just the way things function. Like that's where we need to be spending our time as far as ascribing worth to people. And I thought that was so beautiful. And then when he talked about the flavor piece, and he loves salt. However, the flavor piece was so great because, like you said, it's to enhance. It's not to like douse something with flavor. It's to enhance what's already there. And so the idea that God is already at work, he is. Maybe we don't see it. Maybe we don't recognize it, but God is at work in every heart, in every life. And our role is to come alongside and partner with God in the work that he's already doing. Like we don't have to make things happen. We don't have to like shove Jesus down people's throat. Jesus is at work, and we just get to come alongside and partner with him in these beautiful ways. And I think we have to listen to the Holy Spirit and how we do that. So I'm super jazzed that we're talking about this. I loved it. Can't wait to discuss it more with you guys. All right. Well, we were going to throw it to Osheta, but I think she's been raptured. So pray for the rest of us as we've been left behind. I'm kidding. She was having some technical difficulties. And so, Dan, you and I will carry on with the show.
Let's do it.
All right. So what else stood out to you? I know, Dan, that you work closely with Greg, and I know you're a theologian yourself. And so this is probably scripture that you've heard over and again. But it sounds to me like it even came alive for you in a fresh way this past weekend. Is that true?
Yeah, it did. And one of the things I think about, because I'm always fascinated how, like, take worship music, in particular, looking at salt and light, bringing the light piece in. Like if I go to church, I like worshiping at church, but I don't really listen to worship music when I'm just doing chores and stuff, and I don't really listen to Christian music that much. I listen to secular music. And I think, I know. And I think part of the reason for that is because I think Christian music and secular music really reveals something about salt and light. Because I think that like there's something more about like salt that that Greg didn't talk about, but if I were to do the sermon, I would kind of go into, and that is like when you're kind of showing the worth of a person, you're kind of showing them that it's okay to be the way that they are in all of their imperfections. You're sort of embracing a person as a whole person, not just their good parts, but their whole person. And so, you know, I think when you talk about light, you're talking about what is right and wrong. You're talking about the truth, and you're talking about ideals, and you're talking about, you know, showing what we can be, but not who we actually are. And so you really need both of those. And I think what I've noticed with like Christian music and secular music is that secular music is really good at celebrating salt. It's really good at describing the way things really are. And Christian music is really good at offering light, but you really need both. You need that salt, I think. And so I've often thought about salt and light from the perspective of music like that. And I wish Christian music had more saltiness, not just light.
You wish it were more salty.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. One of the things that Greg talked about toward the end of his message was the part about when the salt loses its saltiness. And then he talked about how it just could get mixed in, like at the time, with dirt or other things, and it caused it to lose its effectiveness. How do you see that playing out if we were to carry that back into our time here, you know, about ascribing others worth, and that's kind of our purpose, to bring out, enhance what God is already doing in people's lives. So what is the danger? I guess that's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
What's the danger of our salt losing its saltiness? What might that look like, so that we can be aware of it and try to avoid that?
Yeah, I don't know if this is the right answer, but this is something that I've kind of been, you know, playing around with. I think that, you know, it matters who is affirming you and who is building you up. And, you know, like if let's say I'm I don't know, a 15-year-old, you know, and I really want to be a quarterback. And so I'm throwing the football around, and which I did when I was 15. I'd like to throw the football around. And let's say I'm throwing the football around, and we're just playing like backyard football with some friends, and I'm throwing the football. And like my grandma comes out and says, well, you're a good quarterback, Danny. It wouldn't, I mean, it'd be nice. Thanks, Grandma. You know, but it wouldn't really like mean much to me. But like if Brett Favre was driving by and he got out and he says, holy cow, Dan, you're a really good quarterback. You need to be on a football team. I mean, that would mean something, you know?
Right.
And so I think that that's an example of, because he comes from a perspective where he knows what he's talking about. And I think that that's again where the salt and the light, I think, has to both be there. If you are you know, living a vibrant life in God, and if you are seeking God, and you've got the Holy Spirit in you, and you are pursuing goodness, and you're living a good life, and you go to somebody who's oppressed and maybe not living a good life, and you tell them, because there's nothing worse that when you're up to no good in life and when you're doing bad things in life, to have some holy roller come by and show off how wonderful they are and how holy they are and how good they are. But to have them come by and say, instead, to say, hey man, you're all right. You know, you're all right. And you have a lot of good in you, because they're not used to hearing that. They're used to hearing you've got a lot of bad in you.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think that having that, you know, having light affects how you can be salt as well. You know, if this is the last example I'll give, you know, I know, you know, working in mental health as long as I have, you know, the multiple times I would get these situations where, you know, somebody would come up and they're very depressed, and they would be talking about how they're feeling depressed, and then somebody else would be at the desk at the same time, and this other person, you know, they've been suicidal their whole life, and they've been, you know, kind of in and out their whole life, and they'll start to give advice to the other person at the desk. And on one hand, that's really good, because it shows like some camaraderie around these things that you're experiencing. But on the other hand, when you're depressed, you don't want to hear from somebody who's chronically depressed and suicidal. You want to hear from somebody who's not depressed and suicidal. And so you need that light as well. And so I think that you can lose your saltiness if you're hypocritical, if you are, you know, basically, I think that hypocritical, where you're sinning, where you're living self-destructively and all that kind of stuff. And so I think that the more light you have, the better your saltiness will be. That's kind of how I look at it. That's a long-winded answer. I sorry. I kind of just worked that all out right
No,
now. And so I
that's
don't
all
know if there's
right.
any merit to it.
That's all right. I think you came up with a really good bumper sticker as well. The
Really?
more light you have, the better your saltiness will be. Here you go.
Yeah, that is good.
Yeah, I think it's important. So when we look at ascribing worth to, which is our job as kingdom people, to agree with what Jesus has said about another human, and to ascribe worth to them, I think that's crucial. But I also think we have to come at it from a place of humility, because I think if we're going around thinking, who do I need to ascribe worth to? Like, we can't come at it from a place of boastful pride, because that could be counterproductive.
Yeah.
But just recognizing, and so I think from a place of humility, from a place of recognizing that God has ascribed worth to us, even when we haven't felt worthy. If we could remember how that feels, and if we can remember how freeing that is, then if we go in that vein to others who have been cast aside and who have been torn down and their worth has been diminished and in many cases demolished, we can with love say to them, I see you. I see things in you that you may not see in yourself, and you are worthy and you are loved, and you matter. And I think that's hugely important. I get sad when I think about, if we think about it like nationally or globally, and this is part of what Greg was talking about, when the salt loses its saltiness, getting mixed in with other things. I think sometimes nationally and globally, we can tend to, see if I can say this right, kind of categorize people, and then depending on what category they fit in, we maybe aren't as concerned with ascribing worth.
Right.
Well, this group of people, blah, they're bozos, as you like to call them, Dan. And I think that kind of thinking is moving away from a kingdom character. That is mixing in other things, that's mixing in, things that are not of God. When we kind of try to silo people off and try to determine, well, this group of people, yes, is worthy, but this group of people, not so much. So I don't know. I'm working that out as I'm talking right now. What do you think about, that?
Well, that's good. I wonder what your thoughts are on, like, what does it mean to ascribe worth, and how do you, like, how do you see that? Like, when I see somebody who's been, having a hard go of it, and I want them to know that they are important even in their sin. What is that exactly? What am I doing when I'm ascribing worth? Like, how do I get a person to feel that worth, do you think?
I think, of course, it depends on the situation, but so many times the fact that you are investing that commodity of time that you've talked so much about, Dan, I think it shows that person that you acknowledge them as valuable, as worthy of your time. And I think that's really powerful, because if you think of, let's just say, like you've said, someone who's really down and out and struggling, chances are they've heard all the negativity as to why they're in that situation, why they can't succeed in life, or whatever it is. And they've heard it from others, and I'm sure they've beaten themselves up. For you to come alongside them and just spend time with them and to acknowledge them, and to, and it's not like you have to go up and say, I ascribe worth to you. That's not what I'm saying. I think when you come alongside them and just try to meet them where they're at, like, find out their story, find out, who they are, and then kind of walk alongside them and try to bring out the good in them. I think that's ascribing worth. I think it's acknowledging them, and just taking the time to notice someone can be huge.
Yeah, that's a really good answer, especially given the time piece, because
Mm-hmm.
that is valuable, and that's a one way
Mm-hmm.
that we can actually give value to a person to verify.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise, because I guess the motivation of my question was, how do you not just kind of be full of platitudes and
Right.
positivity? How do you do something more than just kind of words? And I think that investment of time, that's a real asset, and
Mm-hmm.
so that
Mm-hmm.
validates it.
Yeah.
That's really good.
I think because you've shared before about when you've worked with like at-risk youth and stuff, and
Mhm.
so there was a lot that you were doing to try to help them, but I think the ultimate basic thing was just the time that you gave. And
Yeah.
I think anytime you can give your presence, your time to someone, I don't know that we understand fully how incredible that is to the person receiving that, because they're so used to being discarded or looked over or, bypassed on the street or
Yeah.
whatever. So I think that's
Yeah.
pretty huge.
That is really huge. I agree.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
good.
um, I also wanted to talk a little bit about the fact that as we maybe listen to this message and maybe have to reframe a few things of what we thought it meant to be salt, I wonder how hard that will be for some, because I think many of us feel like if we're following Jesus, we do have some standard things, some practices, some values that we feel like are important and reflect the fact that we follow Jesus. And why would we not want to bestow that gift upon
Yeah.
others? And so I don't know that we're saying you can't, because people need discipleship, of course. So we're not saying don't do that. I think what we're trying to say is you can't like power over and force things on people. Like you said, Dan, you have to accept a whole person where they are, how they are, and hopefully walk alongside them to bring them along. And so I guess my question for you right now is how do we help people who are maybe in that place of saying, yeah, but you still need to do the right things in
Yeah.
order to be a Jesus follower?
Yeah. I think, I guess what I would say is that it's not that you couldn't talk about bad things and the real struggles that people are having. And sometimes, if you have an authority position, you might need to, that might be your responsibility.
Yeah.
And also if you have to set boundaries, you have to say, this is not okay, what you were doing. I mean, there's all those types of factors, but for the most part, I think all of us, I think probably all of us know what our weaknesses are. We already know where we're falling short. We don't need to be told
Yeah.
that, because most of us kind of gnaw on that, and most of us are constantly recycling, self-loathing thoughts about our weaknesses and our flaws. And what a lot of times we don't see are our strengths and our assets, and what we are doing right and what we are doing good, and what
Mm-hmm.
our superpowers are. We know our super
Mm-hmm.
weaknesses, but boy, it really helps when
Yeah.
somebody comes along and shows, look at this ability that you have, look at this skill that you have, look at this these successes that you have, and can help you kind of build on those, and direct yourself down the paths where you can get the biggest spiritual and moral and social and maybe even worldly return on those,
Mm-hmm.
instead of always
Mm-hmm.
focusing on the negative. Um, and definitely, being there, this is definitely what I would say is, when I working in mental health, as soon as we would do like a pre-shift meeting, and where all the nurses and the other psych counselors would kind of meet, and then afterwards, like, everybody would go out onto the unit, and the nurses would go into the nursing station, and a lot of times the counselors would go behind the desk. And man, the first thing I would do, Shawna, is I would go out into the dining room or the living room, and I would sit with the patients, and I would just hang out there, no matter what they're doing. If they're watching
Mm-hmm.
Price is Right or whatever, I would just sit with them. And with that, just sitting there with them made them feel like, we're okay, like,
Yeah.
we're okay. And yeah, we're in the hospital, but look, we're those people, they're staff, but they're not better than us. They're just like us. And
Yeah.
it just kind of like leveled the playing field in a way that
Mhm.
made them much more open to talking about the things that they're struggling with. You're not going to talk
Mhm.
to people about your pain if you think that they're a threat. And the best way
Mhm.
to not be a threat to people is to don't threaten them and to just
Yeah.
accept them and to just like, yeah, whatever, like we all have struggles and be open about your own struggles. And so I think the answer lies somewhere in there.
Yeah. Well, and I love that final example you gave, Dan, because that leads into the next part I wanted us to talk about. And that's again, you used your time, that precious commodity, to just go and sit and be, and to make yourself available. And so that's the other piece of salt. Like, in order to be that preservative, it has to have contact with what it's trying to preserve.
Yeah.
And so if we want to call out the worth of others, if we want to enhance and come alongside with what God is already doing in their life, we have to get approximate, right? We have to get close. We have to be able to rub shoulders. And what you just shared is just a simple but huge example of that. We can't sit back. I mean, it'd be easy, especially during this time when we're all like supposed to be distancing ourselves. We can't just sit back and hope for things to change. We have to get close and get involved.
That's a good point.
Right.
Yeah. I love that salt has to be in contact. That was such a great point. And, you know what it made me think of is that, man, they were doing this. They had no idea about icy sidewalks and icy roads and putting salt on there, talk about needing contact, so.
Oh boy. Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing is I think this whole sermon, Dan, just further illustrates how right you and I are about our sweet and salty situation that we love so much, right? Like, indeed. There's popcorn with salt and butter, and then you add the chocolate and you mix that all together, and it's so good. You make contact. I think that Greg did that for us this weekend. He helped us to say, see, we were right about that.
That's right. Yeah, Dan and Shawna, listen to them. They will bring the light.
Your life will be so much better. But seriously, as we close out our discussion today, I just want to encourage everyone, and then Dan, if you have any last encouraging words, but I want to encourage everyone to really prayerfully look at your life right now. I know we're still in a pandemic, and I know that things are ramping up in that regard, and we're probably going to have to rein it back in a little bit just so we can try to be healthy and safe and care for our communities. But I think we can still prayerfully consider, like, look at our life, look at our relationships, look at those places in which maybe we can see that what we have to offer as a kingdom person is needed. Like, where can we be salt? Where can we add to and enhance the flavor? Where can we ascribe worth to people? And I'm pretty positive if you spend any amount of time in prayer this week doing that the Lord and the Holy Spirit will begin to just reveal situations or people to you in which you can do that.
Yeah.
So that's my encouragement.
That's a great encouragement, I think, because especially now coming into the holidays, if you are planning on being with family members during this COVID time, I'm sure that there are some people there that you could, apply some of these things to, even in your own family. It doesn't have to be as an extreme example like in the Gospels. It could just be a family member who maybe is down on their luck, or they don't like themselves, or whatever. Your family, and it's a great opportunity because you're going to be in contact, you're going to be present, and you can really capitalize on that. So I think that's a great idea.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Dan. As always, it was a fun time having this conversation with you. And thank you all for joining us again this week. We hope to see you next week when we dive a little deeper into our next sermon in this Salt and Light series. Have an awesome day, you guys. Be well.